Hi, my name is Karen Fabian and I'm the founder of Bare Bones Yoga. And I want to talk to you a little bit today about moving from high to low push-up. This is a transition that we do a ton in yoga classes, and it really is one of those movements that's central to yoga practice itself. You'll find it in just about every kind of class, regardless of style. But this movement, even, I guess in spite of the fact that it's done so much, or because of the fact that it's done so much, is one where we really need to be aware as yoga teachers of the associated anatomy with this movement so that we can give people cues that are grounded in anatomy. And once we understand this anatomy, we can really start to come up with a lot of different ways to give people actionable things they can do on the mat to feel steadier in this movement, because it is a challenging one. And because it happens so much, it has the potential to create injury. It's one of those movements that, like I said, we do a lot in a class. We do it, kind of regardless of style of yoga. And some of the injuries that can happen in the shoulder area are oftentimes grounded in this idea of you're doing something a lot over time, or you're doing something consistently over time. And these things are kind of generally referred to as repetitive stress injuries. So again, that's another reason we don't want our students to get hurt. We want them to understand the anatomy. We want them to hear cues that help them move through this movement safely so that they can enjoy their practice for the long term and not have a risk of injury, so decrease the risk of injury to them. So I'm going to go through a couple of the muscles involved. I'll apply it to the movement, and I'm going to link to my mini online course, which will expand even further into this topic. So if you watch this and your interest is piqued, and you're a yoga teacher, and you're really committed to learning the anatomy so you can give effective cues to your students, get my online course. It's very inexpensive, and you can take a look at the free preview and take a look at what's involved in the course. So let me go through some of the muscles with you. So one of the muscles, we're talking, of course, about the shoulder joint itself. And this, even though the elbow is involved as well, the shoulder joint is the area of the body where we have the most concern. The joint itself is made up of the head of the humerus as it fits into the glenoid fossa of the scapula. And we get a lot of mobility in the shoulder because it is a ball and socket. But that connection between the head of the humerus and the glenoid fossa isn't so great. So it really depends, the shoulder really depends on the associated muscles and fascia and ligaments and tendons to keep the joint congruency high. So by that I mean to keep that connection solid. But remember, we're not just talking about keeping that connection solid when we stand up. We're talking about yoga practice where we're moving our body in lots of different ways, and where in some poses we're actually fighting gravity. So now I have to fight against gravity, otherwise I would just fall on the ground. So let's talk first about a muscle we wouldn't want to use, and that is the trapezius. So the trapezius lifts the shoulder blades up. It's a long, broad muscle, but the upper portion of the trapezius rests on the spine of the scapula, and it lifts the scapula up the body. So take a look as I move here if I lift the shoulder blades. Doesn't look so great, right? So we wouldn't want our students to lift the shoulder blades, so what would we want them to do? We want them to keep the shoulder blades hugged onto the body. And the job of that, or the muscle whose job it is to do that, is the serratus anterior. And it runs from the ribs up and around and inserts on the medial aspect of the scapula. You'll see the serratus in action when you come down to the ground and you do a little cat pose action. And you'll see the shoulder blades hug onto the back, and it's just a function of where the muscle is. So ribs to medial aspect of the scapula, this inner line here, this inner border, and that's what it does. And so we want students to use serratus. We don't want them to use upper traps. And another thing we want them to do is to have a little bit of external rotation, or turning the shoulders. What most people say is open, but the correct term is external rotation. But the palms are facing the ground, so how can we get a little of this when the hands face down? Well, we've got to have a little bit of a rotation of this upper arm bone while keeping the palms down. And so I'm doing it here. And so the job, this is the job of two muscles of your rotator cuff, your supraspinatus and your teres minor. And these muscles attach your humerus to the scapula itself. So these muscles, teres minor and infraspinatus, which is kind of in this whole area here, as those muscles do their job of contracting, because they run from here to here, they're going to affect the movement of not only the scapula, but the arm bone, the humerus. And so if you take, even just here, take your hands forward and slightly turn the arm bones outward, the humerus outward, you may start to feel some movement in your scapula. And so when you're moving from high to low push-up, what that would look like is a little bit of that turning out as you lower down. And this will prevent students from using the trapezius. So let me wrap up here by giving you the actual cues that trigger the muscles, but now you know the muscles, so the cues are going to be so much more effective whether you use my wording or your own wording, and you're going to have a much better idea of what's happening in your students' bodies, and you're going to be able to answer questions really effectively and intelligently as they come up. So here, as I'm in plank, I press into the ground, activating serratus. As I move forward and lower, I slightly turn the inner eyes of the elbows forward, activating teres minor and infraspinatus. I don't want them to use the trapezius, so if I see that they're lifting their shoulder blades, I ask them to slightly drop the shoulder blades down the back. So that's just a quick primer. Two of the muscles or three of the muscles we'd want people to use, and a muscle we wouldn't want them to use. And sometimes it's nice to know what you don't want to use, because not only do you learn it, it gives you an ability to compare and contrast with the thing you want to do. So again, I'm going to link here to the course on high to low push-up. You can take a look at the preview and purchase it. I think it's $45. So a very reasonable investment to learn more in depth about this movement, the associated anatomy involved, so that you can confidently share it with your students, so that your cues will be more effective, and so that you can teach them safe, steady practice, not only for today, but for the long term. Thank you so much for watching. Namaste.